Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another beautiful day, at least for now, here at Walt Disney World. So today I wanted to talk to you about some terrible advice that I heard about on social media. I know we do this every once in a while, but it's that time of year, you know? Everyone's gearing up for their summertime vacations, and that means a lot of people are sharing tips, tricks, and other information about visiting Walt Disney World, and that tends to mean some bad pieces of advice make their way out onto social media. And one came across my feed the other day, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it because it's one of those pieces of advice that honestly, I think it can really ruin your vacation. So I want to tell you what it is, tell you why I think it's a terrible piece of advice, and hopefully if you happen to have come across this, you're relying on this little tip to really, solve a particular problem that you're looking to solve, you know what to expect and you don't end up in a situation you don't want to be in. So this piece of advice is about hydrating. And first and foremost, chances are if you're here, you've hung out with us before, you know that hydration is so important when you're visiting Walt Disney World, especially this time of year. By the way, certainly not relaxing on this balcony today, but just as what it is. Not only is it hot and humid here in Florida, which probably isn't news to anybody, but when you're at Walt Disney World, you're doing a lot of walking, you're spending a lot of time in direct sunlight, and that can lead you straight to dehydration really, really quickly. Even if you're trying hard to avoid it, it happens to the best of us. Even I find myself in a position where I just simply haven't had enough to drink and I suffer the consequences. So it's not unlikely that you'll find yourself in this type of position when you're at Walt Disney World, especially during the summer months yourself, especially too, if we're talking about little ones who can't always communicate that what they really need is more fluids. Sometimes they just seem like they're super cranky, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Anyway, this piece of advice is about lightening your load, which is another thing that a lot of people want to do when they're visiting Walt Disney World. They don't always want to carry a backpack with a heavy water bottle. It's just a lot, you know? Anyway, this person said that rather than bringing a water bottle with you, they're gonna have to lug around all day, you can just get cups of water at quick service locations around the Walt Disney World Resort. On the surface, this is a great tip, and it's a great thing to be aware of because yes, you can absolutely get free cups of ice water at quick service locations throughout Walt Disney World. This includes places like Starbucks, as well as any other place that you stumble across, especially when you're at the theme parks, but the same can be said for over at the resorts as well. I don't think it's as common over at Disney Springs, but it's kind of a whole different beast. And I'm sure you're wondering, hold on a second, where does this turn into terrible advice? Because this isn't untrue. You absolutely can get free cups of ice water at these quick service locations, and that's a great way to stay hydrated. Why is it terrible advice? Well, simply put, this piece of advice leads you to believe that this is going to be enough water to get you through your day. And the reality of the situation is it's definitely not. It's also not as accessible as it seems like it would be. You know, like again, on the surface, it's great that you can get these free cups of ice water, but in practice, how easy is it to get these free cups of ice water? When can you get them? All of that is really important to know if you're gonna go this route, so I wanna talk to you a little bit about that now. First and foremost, when we're talking about free cups of ice water, we're talking about free small cups. They're the small little cups that you get at quick service locations, a kid's size drink. This is definitely enough water to get you through a meal. If you want to avoid purchasing a drink, you can get yourself a free cup of ice water to wash whatever it is that you're enjoying down. It's definitely a good way to supplement your water intake, but it's not necessarily going to be enough to keep you hydrated. The small cup of water, like I said, enough to just wet your whistle. But if you want to make sure that you're staying hydrated, staying safe during your Disney vacation, this just isn't going to be enough. Now, of course, you can stop at all of the quick service locations and get a free cup of ice water, but there are a few things to know about these quick service locations. First and foremost, they don't open with the park, at least not all of them. And so that means at the start of the day, when it's really important to be hydrating, you might not have access to water. So that's really important to keep in mind, and one of the many reasons that I recommend bringing a water bottle of your own, but we'll get more into that here in a second. It's also important to note that ice water from these locations, they're not just available for you to grab. Sometimes they will be, especially on on really hot days, and some locations will have like a water jug where you can pour your own cup of ice water, but that's not as common as you think it might be. And so it's important to realize that it's going to take some time. So you're going to go up to the quick service location, you're going to get yourself in line, get yourself a cup of ice water that way. It's not necessarily going to be as quick and easy, and definitely not as available as it sounds when some people give these pieces of advice. So it's just another thing to be aware of if you're going to be heavily reliant on these cups of ice water. Now, just like the quick service locations might not necessarily be open in the morning, they're not going to be open until park close either. So this is going to be another thing you want to be aware of, especially once you get to the end of the day, especially if you've been in the park all day long. When you need to get more water in you might not necessarily have access to it, especially again, if you're relying on quick service locations only. Now again, I don't think that getting your water from quick service locations is a bad idea. I just don't think that it's enough to sustain you throughout the day. The best way to do that is to bring a water bottle with you, especially if you don't want to end up having to purchase water from carts around the park. Water at Walt Disney World is expensive, bottled water that is. And while I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea to get yourself a bottle of water and then refill it at bubblers or water bottle fill stations throughout the parks, having to rely on that can take a huge chunk out of your budget. So I don't really think that that's the best route to go. Now, in my opinion, the best method, the best route to go is to bring a water bottle with you. I prefer an insulated water bottle because I can pour that ice water in and it will stay colder longer, but there are also a lot of other options out there that might be right for you and your family. So you can get something super lightweight, that's wonderful. Or if you don't like the taste of Florida water, which by the way is something that some people are gonna have, they're not gonna like, okay? You have the option of getting some water bottles that do have a filter attached. So as you suck the water through, it filters the water and you get delicious fluids through that straw. I have one that I really like. It's by Brita. I'll have that linked with more information in the description box. I definitely think that you should check that out if you're interested in bringing a water bottle and the flavor of the water here. You don't want to deal with it. One way or another though, I do think that it's important to make sure that you're focusing some attention on hydration when you're visiting Walt Disney World and doing more than a casual cup of water here and there. While that might work for some people who maybe casually visit the parks, they're in there for a couple hours before they bounce, it's not going to be right for those of you who are there all day, and it's certainly not going to be right for those of you who have kids. Again, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes kids can't communicate that they need more fluids, that they're not feeling well, so you want to be able to have something that they can continually drink throughout the day. I know we've talked about this before, but I do want to mention it again. So often people think their little ones are just being overwhelmed and cranky, but sometimes that can be a sign that they're working their way toward dehydration, and that can be a huge problem. Dehydration in general can be a major problem, and it's one that's so often overlooked. And I'll tell you from experience, more people than you would think get pulled out of the park because of heat-related illnesses during the summer months. So try and make sure that you're not one of them. Make sure that you're staying hydrated. Make sure you're bringing a water bottle with you, filling it up regularly, drinking as often as you can. Yeah, you might have to make some bathroom breaks, but it's just what happens sometimes when you're staying hydrated. I'm positive that you'll end up having a better and safer trip if you go that route versus just winging it and getting some water whenever you can. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. Of course, I'd love to hear yours. Tell me if you've ever taken advantage of the free ice water around Walt Disney World and your favorite place to get it at each of the 4 theme parks. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. But until then, I'm off. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.